In the past few decades, the Chinese economy has grown at a breakneck speed, allowing living standards to soar, with GDP per person growing 500% in the past 20 years. China has become a major force in the global economy, with an estimated 20% of global GDP by the end of 2022. Yet the seemingly unstoppable rise of Chinese economic growth has been hit by three problems: a bust in the property market, innumerable COVID lockdowns, and a change in demographics, which will reduce long-term productivity. We will look at the extent to which the Chinese economy is in crisis, why things went wrong, and whether some kind of economic collapse is possible. When we think of the Chinese economy, we tend to think of manufacturing exports, and for good reason. If you buy any manufactured goods, there's a good chance it will say made in China. However, exports now only account for 20% of Chinese GDP, down from 36%. A lot of recent growth has come from a booming property market. The property market and related industries now accounts for 30% of Chinese GDP. In the past decade, there's been a surge in prices, encouraging an investment boom. And these rising prices have encouraged speculative demand, with people buying property for investment rather than living. According to a paper published last year, China built roughly 18% more houses than is required to meet that fundamental demand. And it did that even after demolishing over 7 million old or decrepit houses. Seeking to cash in on rising prices, property developers have sought to build and sell as many as they can. And in doing this, the property bubble caused many big property firms to become very highly leveraged. In particular, they sold houses well before they were finished construction. People desperate to buy paid up in advance and ended up with mortgages even before they had a house to live in. The speculative fever has seen Chinese house prices rise to some of the highest price-to-earning ratios in the world, with Beijing 44 times average incomes, which compares to 10 times in New York. It is worth pointing out that developing economies do tend to have higher price-to-income ratios. For example, according to this, India and Cambodia have even higher ratios. Nevertheless, in August 2020, the Chinese government became concerned about the overheating property market, and they sought to put an end to this property speculation and reduce the cost of living. They placed 3 red lines on the ratio of debt to cash, equity and liquidity, with the aim of preventing speculation and reducing house prices. However, given the overinflated market and reliance on highly leveraged loans, it immediately set off a series of ripple effects, with big property lenders and builders getting into a shortage of liquidity. This caused the biggest property developer, Evergrande, last year to announce it could no longer support $300 billion of liabilities. And in the absence of any effective government support, this led to many home buyers left with outstanding mortgage balances but no homes to live in. So understandably, homeowners lost confidence. And unusually for a country that suppresses dissent, spontaneous mortgage boycotts started, with buyers refusing to continue to pay for homes which were not finished. The slogan for non-payment of mortgages was "Construction stops, mortgage stops. Deliver homes and get repaid." This is all different to the US housing crisis of 2008. In that period, it was homeowners who couldn't pay their mortgages. Generally, the Chinese can pay, but the problem is developers can't provide the houses that they've already sold because they're short of finance and they can't borrow anymore. All this started a liquidity squeeze, with property developers getting caught up in the loss of confidence and non-payment of mortgages. This also caused potential buyers to become wary and property firms to cut back on investment. So it has led to innumerable housing projects being left in limbo, with unfinished properties and consumers sold mortgages but nowhere to live. The consequence has been a fall in prices and a fall in construction starts. Real estate accounts for 70% of personal wealth in China, and understandably, falling prices and uncertainty has caused a very sharp fall in consumer confidence and consumer spending. For a central government with so much political and economic clout, the response has been muted, pushing the responsibility onto local and regional governments, who are not really able to give the necessary finance and universal reassurance. Local governments have already been hit by COVID shutdowns and the decline in their biggest source of income, which is land sales to property developers. On top of mortgage and property turmoil, the policy of zero COVID has led to very disruptive lockdowns and uncertainty across the country. To ordinary people, the policy of harsh lockdowns seems very arbitrary and disruptive. It is due to a failure to vaccinate older people and a political attachment to zero COVID. Strict lockdowns continue to this day, disrupting normal economic activity and discouraging investment. It's led to a fall in confidence and consumer spendings. Retail sales, which used to grow at 10% a year plus, is now falling. The economic uncertainty and slowdown in growth is causing a rise in unemployment, with up to 1 in 5 young people aged 16 to 25 unemployed. Official statistics paint a rosy picture of an economy close to full employment. However, these are somewhat misleading. Surveys show higher rates than officially registered unemployed, and also figures only concentrate on urban areas. The real unemployment is in agricultural areas in the north. Even now, 23% of Chinese workers are employed in agriculture, despite it becoming a relatively small sector of the economy. A key factor in past Chinese growth was the ability for Chinese labourers to leave their low productivity agricultural jobs and find higher paying jobs in manufacturing. This is why China has needed such a strong growth rate in the past to absorb the surplus labour leaving agricultural areas. So this slowdown in economic growth which is happening this year is a major cause of concern, because it could lead to rising unemployment in a country with limited social security. In a response to this financial turmoil and slowdown in growth, the Chinese government have cut interest rates in a bid to help homeowners and stimulate demand. This has led to a sharp depreciation in the Chinese currency. Now, this depreciation does help Chinese exports become more competitive, but it is not the panacea it once was for the Chinese economy. As we said earlier, exports are less important as a share of GDP, and the fall in the currency may discourage foreign investment already nervous about China. And with global growth slowing down due to the global energy shock, exports are lower than usual. Also, it is worth pointing out there is a concern about the validity of Chinese statistics. The FT recently pointed out how the number of statistics has fallen in 2012 from 80,000 to less than 10,000 today. And there is concern about the validity of Chinese statistics because of political pressure to boost regional figures. One economist at the University of Chicago suggests that light intensity figures show Chinese GDP may have been exaggerated by around 33% in the past 20 years. The increasingly autocratic nature of Xi Jinping is also unnerving financial investors. Since the invasion of Ukraine earlier this year, the West has woken up to the downside of relying on imports from autocratic states with territorial ambitions. Both President Trump and Biden have promoted some kind of restrictions on imports from China, as the US seeks greater independence in semiconductors and battery technology. With Jinping often favouring Chinese state-owned firms, multinationals are definitely thinking twice about investing in China, especially when there are new opportunities in Asia, such as India. Another problem worth mentioning is the demographic crunch soon to hit China. Its successful one-child family became almost too successful, with birth rates falling to 1.6 and the population now aging rapidly. Over the next 20 years, the median age in China will rise from 35 to 50, and its status as the most populous country will soon be eclipsed by its neighbour India. This will put pressure on government spending on pensions and healthcare and lead to a smaller workforce. Now, it is worth pointing out that the Chinese demographic crunch is also similar to other Western economies, such as Italy, Korea and Japan. Now, given all this bad news, I have seen a few videos talking about a Chinese economic collapse. But this is either misplaced wishful thinking or typical YouTube clickbait. The truth is, there really is no chance of a Chinese economic collapse. It has too many assets, household savings, foreign exchange reserves, a strong manufacturing base. Now, it's true the property market is undergoing a significant and real crisis, which may well get worse, but it will not completely undermine the whole economy. Even the credit crunch, which decimated the US housing market in 2008, only caused a year or so long recession in the US. Also, it is not all doom and gloom for China. One area where China is a world leader is developing and building a greener economy. Despite having very high CO2 emissions, China will account for 40% of the growth in global renewable energy. 10% of Chinese new car sales are now electric, one of the highest rates in the world, and it is building really huge capacities of wind and solar energy to fund its ever-growing need for electricity. Also, to put the Chinese crisis in perspective, this is a historical graph of UK GDP with all the economic and financial crisis labelled. The point is, you can have a serious economic crisis, but it doesn't mean a collapse of the economy. Even a very severe recession in China would only slow down the long-run trend rate of economic growth. And despite all these downward pressures on Chinese growth, it is still expected to grow next year, with forecasts ranging from 2 to 4%. Now, it's true, this is much lower than the past, but whilst we talk of Chinese economic crisis, the OECD recently claimed that it is Chinese and Indian economic growth that may save the world economy from slipping into recession next year. However, what is true is that the very high rates of economic growth in China is over. Slowing productivity and demographic changes will inevitably lead to lower economic growth rates. Also, the property market is unlikely to remain the prime driver of economic growth as in the past. It will need a much more sustainable property market, one that avoids boom and busts. It will also need to look elsewhere for new sources of economic growth, to green technology and manufacturing as a source of future growth. I hope you found this video useful. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Economics Help. I'll be bringing out lots more great videos soon.